Alrighty, let's get started. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our conversation today, 2026 Executive Cyber Risk Playbook. And we're going to explore how you can build some cyber resilience in your organization and keep it secured. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions, and here we specialize in helping small and medium-sized businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. Uh, we help clients do their most important work and by growing their business without worrying about the underlying tech and security. So a few housekeeping notes before we get started here. Our conversation will run about 30 or so minutes. We'll stick around at the end for answer some questions. The conversation will be recorded. So if you'd like to go ahead and share and review that information at a later time, you'll be able to do that. Happy to take questions during the webinar. So you'll notice in the Zoom toolbar, there'll be a Q&A box there. Please go ahead and submit any questions there. And we'll make sure that we make time at the end to go through those. Alrighty. To get started here, you'll notice a QR code in the lower right corner. That's going to lead to an offer page for attendees of the webinar. So in case you need to leave early, you might want to just take a scan that and take a photo of that. And for today's discussion, I'd like to introduce Pat Curtin from Field Effect. Pat is a executive with over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity and networking. He's worked for a variety of cybersecurity roles spanning the public and private sector, including 4 years leading an enterprise security operations center. Got his start as a communications engineer with the Air Force and holds a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering. So welcome, Pat, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here. It's an important discussion to be had given what's happening out there in the world today.
Absolutely. So let's get started here. So let's review the agenda for today's discussion. We'll talk about updates that we're seeing to the threat landscape in 2026. We'll talk about how these breaches are happening. We'll talk through some of the kind of the risks that businesses face, some of the costs that are resulting from some of these breaches, and we'll talk through a pathway to getting your company more resilient and talk through some next steps. All right, so let's get started about the threat landscape. So there's a lot going on. So we're seeing new trends, Pat. I'm hearing, deep fakes. AI is now starting to infiltrate the security threat landscape. And then this is all in addition to all the kind of stalwarts that we've been seeing over the past couple of years: ransomware, business email compromise, et cetera. So what are you seeing on your side?
Right. So, I mean, we're in the thick of it, right? We are fighting cyber criminals each and every day, and it's a field that is changing and changing rapidly, but in a way it always has. The important thing to remember is the fundamentals stay the same while the environment keeps changing. But what are we seeing today? Well, we're seeing a real wide variety of attackers. The very talented cybercrime gangs are on the prowl, but we're seeing more and more effective attacks by people that have relatively little skill. And the barrier to entry for those people really has never been lower. They can easily, as long as they're willing to spend a few $100s a month, they can access not just point tools, but an entire attack suites that gives them everything they need to target and go after different organizations. So that's, you know, the technology available to them is that part is relatively new. So there's more, risk, more effective attacks coming at us because of these tools. And then on top of all of that, we have AI, which is being used. There's a lot of hype around it, but it is being used to basically speed up attacks and to broaden the scale of attacks. And we might circle back on that a little later, but it's pretty bad. And all of that leads to ransomware and business email compromise. So that's the risk that SMBs are facing is the risk of being ransomware and the risk of being victimized by business email compromise. Now, the good news, all of this is preventable. This is not inevitable. Things need to be done, but this is entirely preventable.
And we're also seeing, the rise of the ransomware gangs, right? This is a full-on business enterprise. It's like what the third largest GDP in terms of economy in the world behind US and China. Like this is a full-on scourge, right?
Absolutely. It's very lucrative, right? There's a reason that criminals are going in this direction. It doesn't involve holding up banks and the risk of actually, being shot. Um, but it's a scourge, and it isn't getting better, right? Um, so yes, it's unfortunate that this is the way it is, but our role is to try and help people to prevent getting themselves into that situation. And what we have here in this slide, Rob, is just an example. So I'll just spend a minute on that. So PowerSchool, this breach came to light almost exactly a year ago. So PowerSchool is a provider to most school boards in the United States and Canada, and they got hacked, and they lost the data on 70 million students and teachers, and some of that information is pretty sensitive. So, um, PowerSchool was subjected to this ransomware attack. They didn't pay up, and the criminal got caught, and that's who we see in the lower right corner. That is a 19-year-old who was living with his parents in Massachusetts, and not a very skilled hacker. He was taking advantage of some of these tools, um, and he obtained a stolen login credential. He logged in, and then he was off to the races. So it's an example of where that lower end, like he's not a cybercrime gang. A cybercrime gang could have done this, but so can this low level, lowly skilled individual. Um, and it's just it's a fairly scary example of what one young guy can do.
Now, what was interesting, and we've talked about this one before, and I think what kind of struck me was some of the tactics that the hackers used that to me were kind of like, wow, I was just really surprised by that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, in this case, he obtained a stolen login, and that's from phishing, right? So basically, it used to be that phishing was all about dropping malware, dropping malicious code onto a system. Nowadays, phishing, those tricky emails are there to trick us into giving up our login credentials, and they can fool everybody. They're generally about something to do with tech, like your Microsoft SharePoint is misconfigured. You're going to lose access. You got to go here right now, log in. Right? They'll add in kind of urgency and risks, and um, that helps drive the attack, right? And then they basically can automatically spread through the network using these tools that they're renting, right? Whereas before, that ransomware gang would have had to develop all of that stuff on their own. In this case, he was actually leveraging some of their tools, right?
Yeah. And then, but they would kind of reach out to the parents too, right?
So that actually was a separate education attack, but it is worth
Okay.
mentioning. That was Clark County School Board, which was hacked. That's the fifth biggest board in the country. It's in Nevada, and that was a cybercrime gang. They attacked that board, and when they obtained that information, instead of contacting the board, they contacted the parents, which is probably the worst thing we've seen, because there was disciplinary records, medical records, and they were basically telling the parents, "Hey, you got to talk to the board and get them to pay up, or we're releasing this stuff." And so you can imagine the damage and trust in that environment. Um, that it particularly gruesome kind of example, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about like how do these attacks start these days? Now, like
Yeah.
large percentage of them seems to be initiated through, phishing and email. Can you talk through like, how do they get into the businesses? How do they like where do they
Yeah.
get their footholds?
Pretty much every single attack is a variant of those first three bullets I have here, and most of them are a variant of the first, what we call identity attacks, and that's just a fancy way of describing. Most of the times, it's phishing, right? Where they're sending us those emails to try and trick us into coughing up our credentials, our identity information, which will then be used to log in. Sometimes they'll use social engineering, right? They might contact a help desk and pretend that I'm going to pretend I'm Rob and get my password reset and then go off that way. Um, so that's actually a huge majority of the attacks. But vulnerable systems are also being attacked, and not just any ones. It's often what we call edge devices. So the firewalls that are meant to protect us are increasingly being shown to have lots of vulnerabilities. So if they're not patched, I mean, when they get patched, it's fine. But if they aren't updated appropriately, they become vulnerable and they become hot points for the threat actors. And finally, undefended systems. In pretty much any network, there are going to be some systems that should have defensive stuff on them that don't. Any number of reasons that happens. And then those become, the Achilles heel of a network, which the threat actors will use to get in. But here's the thing, once the threat actor gets inside, and there's so many ways for them to get in under those three categories, but once they get inside, what they do is fairly well understood. There's certain things they have to do if they're going to exploit that network, right? And I mean, it can get into all the technical mumbo jumbo. I won't unless someone wants to in the Q&A. But basically, there's a whole bunch of choke points that are observable, and you can see this stuff happening, no matter what file names they're using or how they're trying to do it. Now the tricky part is actually being able to parse out to find those things. That's the hard part, and that's very difficult for an SMB, even if they have cybersecurity professionals, still very hard for individuals to do that.
Yeah. So we're seeing a couple of examples like in the real world right now, like Windows 10 has been end of life, and that is as of October of 2025. We still see a lot of companies that still haven't upgraded and updated those systems to the latest, Windows 11, et cetera. So those are going to be, kind of sitting ducks. You mentioned firewall and VPN appliances. We've seen some very common attacks that have created a lot of problems for some businesses recently. And then you mentioned the identity-based attacks and social engineering. I mean, that happened with the casino attack, the MGM Grand, and that's how they got into that system. And I think one other kind of interesting point, I think, is that as mentioned, that these are the various entry points, but also the time that they're spending inside the network before they're going ahead and launching that attack has been steadily declining, right? Because they've been able to go ahead and launch their attacks faster. I mentioned that MGM attack, that was within a week. So now we're seeing, much even faster than that at this point. So maybe you can talk a little very briefly about like, how that window is closing and, basically what should be the steps that businesses should be thinking about to help kind of counteract that.
Right. You're bang on. That's what we call dwell time. It's how long a threat actor is on a network before they detonate their encryption to encrypt the system and send out ransom notes. Right. Once they get on the network, they need to spread, and then they need to find data, and they need to send that data out, the data that they want to steal. That takes time. There was a city of Dallas attack a few years ago where they took 3 months to do that. Now, what we're seeing is they're doing that within weeks, if not days, if not hours, depending on their degree of automation. This is part of the reason we're concerned about AI coming in, is AI itself can be used to compress that time, right? So it means you need to find them fast. It speaks to automation on the defense side. It speaks to automated blocking. It speaks to the need to be operating around the clock, and that's a key one that we'll touch on again.
Yeah, just that real-time alerting where it becomes really
Yeah,
critical. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about just, what's the hard costs that we're seeing right now? So if a business has one of these events happen, like what's the true impact?
Yeah, I've got pretty much all of them sketched out right here. We tend to focus on the first bullet, the hard dollar costs, which is dollars directly flowing out because of this. So, you know, first of all, almost any, or I would say any organization that gets breached, they're going to be bringing in external help. Even the very largest organizations that have big teams and a decent size security team, they're bringing in external help because even they don't have the expertise to deal with it, right? That's costly. Staff overtime can be really significant. You're typically also going to have to buy new hardware and software. And then there's, stuff around the edges, like you may need extra legal help, breach coach. You might need communication specialists for dealing with a client base. You may have to offer credit monitoring if you've lost, data for a large number of people, like Ticketmaster did a few years ago, and I was
Yeah.
stung by that one. Um, you know, Credit monitoring was offered, and that costs money. And then finally, organizations that aren't ready for this sometimes have to are backed up and have to pay ransom. So that's like all hard dollar costs, and that can be, you know, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars or even into the millions. Um, but then there's these other elements that are really, really significant, arguably more significant. So, for a business, when you get ransomware, you're going to lose your traditional way of doing business. So I don't know. Do you want to mention the car dealerships that were hit not that long ago?
Yeah, so a lot of dealerships use various lines of business applications, like many businesses do. And one of those large business applications called CDK was hacked over the 4th of July, right before the 4th of July last year, and that brought down 15,000 dealerships for I think it was over like 3 weeks plus weeks, and they effectively went back to pen and paper, and then so that cost the industry, I think, over $1 billion. And that really, I think, was, hopefully, it's still questionable, but it's become a little bit of a wake-up call for that industry that's, typically been very underprotected and, just underinvested in their cyber and risk mitigations and so forth. But yeah, it adds up quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Land Rover over in the UK, more recently got, the final cost of that breach is over a billion, and it affected their whole supply chain for several months. So that's a really big um, hidden cost, right? And and the same goes for the public sector. They're unable to fulfill their mandate. Those school boards, they have to revert to chalkboards, which they're not really ready to do, right? So um, another really key one is that loss of sensitive data. So people get upset. And this happened to you, I think, Rob, as well. It's not a good feeling when your data that's been entrusted to another organization gets lost. It goes out there on the dark web, right? It's not a good feeling.
Yeah,
That impacts trust,
for
right?
sure.
Trust takes a long time to win.
Quickly and quick to lose.
Yeah, quick to lose. And that's that next bullet, right around loss of reputation and trust. You spend years building that up, and it can really be you can be in trouble on that front in a heartbeat when something goes wrong with this.
Yeah.
Put all that together.
Yeah, so let's talk through some of the, we have lots of conversations with businesses and prospects and clients and so forth. And like I know I hear very common refrains, and I'm sure you've heard some of them as well. So maybe talk through some of these briefly.
Sure. So, and we hear these all the time, right? So, first of all, typically people have at least basic defenses in place, like antivirus, endpoint detection and response, firewall, and they feel good about that. And, unfortunately, even 20 years ago, when I started in cybersecurity itself, that wasn't enough. Um, and unfortunately, I mean, you need to have these things. They're table stakes, but they're not enough for those attacks that we're seeing happening today. They will defeat a certain kind of attack, but there's lots of newer attacks that won't. Okay, so that's kind of the first one. Um, Backups. We'll talk about backups again in a minute, but we have backups in place. We're good. Well, backups are really only important for in this context for after you're breached, and really you want to avoid getting breached in the first place. It's the same thing with cyber insurance, right?
Yeah, I say, but and then for backups, I mean, what are the hackers doing, right? They're going and deleting the backups. So
They'll go
like you
for them.
yeah, they're
Yeah,
going to go for that. And, then when you try and restore something, you don't have anything to go back to. Right.
absolutely. And cyber insurance is there to help you get back on your feet. It'll pay for some of those costs we talked about, but typically it won't pay for lost revenue. Um, and and again, you don't want to have to go there. Like you have insurance on your car, but you don't want to have a car accident. Same thing with this, right? The last two there, we're going to know if something went wrong. Typically, once they're in, if you haven't noticed, you're not going to notice until they detonate that encryption. Um, And finally, and especially important for the SMB space, we're too small. No one's going to bother with us. You can understand why people think this, right? Like the SMB stories don't make the news, but SMBs are the majority of businesses out there, and SMBs are being targeted like crazy, right? And often don't have the things in place. The good news is, if you're a small and medium business, it's actually easier to get secured than a real big organization. But
Yeah,
they're absolutely being targeted. If you're on the internet, if a business is on the internet, is being targeted.
for sure. I mean, just a quick experience share. We had a prospect come to us in the middle of an event, and they were a small CPA for 6 people. And one of the principals had gotten phished, and the hacker was submitting fraudulent tax returns up to the IRS. In fact, they submitted, I think, 185 of them. And the IRS caught wind of that, went ahead and blacklisted the organization from transacting. And so if you're a small CPA firm and you can't interact with the IRS, that's obviously a problem. And it took them, well over a year and a half to get out from under that. So it was pretty significant. So we've talked about, okay, the issues and the challenges. Now, how do we go ahead and solve this? Where do companies, what can companies do in order to help mitigate and get on the right path?
Right. This is the question I get most often. Is like, what do we do? What's the one thing I got to do, Pat? And there's no one thing. Um, to get to resilience is just cyber resilience. And what I mean by cybersecurity resilience really is, it's that ability to withstand that punch. You're going to get that you're going to get that phishing attempt, and maybe even they get inside. But resilience is making sure that it doesn't spread. Uh, you know, Resilience is making sure if an employee makes a mistake, like giving up those credentials, maybe it's a bad day for them. Okay. But it's not going to be a bad day for the whole organization. And it really comes down to things you can do in these three pillars: people, process, and technology. So we'll have a quick look at each one of those. So
Let's
on the
talk through.
people front,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead,
for
Rob.
it. I was going to say, introducing the people front, go for it.
Okay. So, first and foremost, it's about awareness, and not just awareness for employees, but also for leaders. So there's, a cybersecurity awareness training people can take where you're going to learn to recognize how these phishing emails look, because they can be super convincing, but there are things to watch for. Like, introducing a sense of urgency to your response, trying to scare you, trying to threaten you, right? And there are things we can do to arm them as well, right? So that your employees become not your biggest risk, but your first line of defense. That's really the goal, and it's very achievable. You want to promote a cybersecurity culture, right? You want it to be part of what people are thinking about, rather than something they're scared of or they're going to hide. And finally, when it comes to the people aspect of cybersecurity, it's not that easy to find cybersecurity experts. Um, and certainly for SMBs, most these days are looking to leverage help from the outside. And there's different ways to do that. And of course, we are one of them. Because it just, and we know, like, it's not that easy to find the talent or retain them. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the people front.
So a quick question there. You mentioned, cybersecurity culture. In our experience, it's been really, it starts from the top, really. So how do you get leadership buy-in? And then how do you kind of start there, especially for folks that are like either don't get it or don't see it? Hopefully this is as a way for them to um, kind of bridge that gap.
That's a real tough one, right? And so I actually get involved in those discussions myself, where we might have, say, um, an IT director in an organization knows they need to improve, and he's having a hard time getting through, and bringing in someone like yourself or myself to talk to, senior leadership or a board, just to talk about those, what is happening today. And it's not about fear, it's about reality.
Right.
All right. We can
Talk through
talk
the
about
process.
process. Yeah, this is one where people's eyes glaze over, but it's super important. So very briefly, there are things we need to do day to day that um, that will really make things improve, right? Like, what do you do when an employee leaves the organization, right? Threat actors love dormant accounts. You need to deprovision those accounts, right? Um, Same thing with systems. When you stop using a system, you need to decommission it. You need to get it offline. You need to wipe the data off of it. Um, Reviewing privilege. Rob, today you might be a system administrator with a high level of privileges in your network, and tomorrow you get a different job in the organization. You don't need that. Well, you don't need those privileges anymore either. So those are examples of processes that and procedures that are really important. Um, that that exercise of mitigating technical risk is super important too. It's a proactive way for us to address vulnerabilities on an ongoing basis. Like, it's not one and done, but the whole idea here is, let's find um, vulnerable systems so that we can make them less vulnerable before the threat actor comes along and exploits them, right? And finally, two that I've only started mentioning recently, and they're not technical. It's because, as an example, social engineering goes after a help desk. Well, you need a help desk to have very robust procedures so that they can't be sweet talked into being nice and doing something for a threat actor, right? And they rely on that, right? So playbooks are really important, and financial controls for business email compromise, right? So that any invoices over a certain amount, maybe you need a second person to approve, and you're not going to do it just on the basis of a phone call that might be fake from your CEO, yeah, or a fake invoice that has been sent uh, through business email compromise. So these are good examples of process that can be really effective in tightening things up.
Yeah, or even fake phone calls. Yeah,
Yes.
I can go ahead and clone like get a recording of somebody's voice, go ahead and clone that. It can be an executive, a CEO, it can be a controller. And I can go ahead and make
Yeah.
them say things in that voice and trick people into doing stuff, right?
Yeah, it's the same idea as when you get something wacky related to your credit card. You're not going to go on your SMS link or your email link. You're going to call the number on the back of the credit card, so you know you're getting the right place, right? So technology is the last pillar, and this is where we tend to focus. But first of all, there are best practices we can put in place, like multi-factor authentication. That one is super important. Network segmentation, backups we talked about. Okay, what we want are we want a backup strategy. And Rob, I know ITS does this for clients, but you don't want it to be just online. You want to have an offline aspect that can't be touched by the threat actor, because
Yeah,
that's, when push comes to shove at the end of the day, in a worst case scenario, that's what you're going to rebuild from, right?
for sure.
Um, Vulnerability management, that this is the technical side of the process I talked about, where you're constantly scanning and looking for vulnerable systems so you can do something about them. 24/7 attack detection and blocking. So let me just pause there for a second. The threat actors are coming at us at all hours, right? And we need to be checking constantly, like not just during working hours, for indications of attacks, right? And when we see them, if we have good confidence in them, we want to block them right away. And we can do quite a bit of that in basically real time, automated. Um, and to supplement those kind of analytics you have running there, you also want to harness AI and machine learning to target the stealthiest attacks. And those, I'll just mention it quickly: living off the land attacks, where a threat actor is going to come in. They're not even going to try and bring malware in, because that's something that be relatively easy to detect. They're going to try and use your own tools against you, right? Um, and there are ways to detect that kind of behavior. It's actually called user behavioral analytics, and AI plays a big role in there. You put all of that together, you put those previous pillars together, you put all of that, that gets you defense in depth. Defense in depth equals resilience.
So it's basically like, I guess like taking maybe like a football analogy. It's really about blocking and tackling and its fundamentals. If you have good fundamentals, you're going to, just by doing those fundamentals in a consistent manner, you're going to just reduce a lot of risk just from that. Right, Pat?
100%. And when the other coach does a trick play, your defense in depth is going to be able to adjust to handle that, right? So as the landscape is changing, you're rolling with it.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk through some of the ways that ITS can help with some of these things. So we offer what we call ITS Secure, and this is effectively just protecting what really matters most. So it's protecting your operations, it's protecting your data, and your ability to stay in business and respond to something that's coming at you, right? And with real-time monitoring that we've talked about, we're able to go ahead and just block this stuff at the get-go. Think oftentimes most companies these days, the vast majority, don't have this level of visibility. And so someone's in and doing stuff, but we just have no awareness that that is even happening. So this is, I think we're there, Pat, you're talking about this, having this real-time awareness and dedicated teams and sets of eyes that are looking and watching for these things. And then, combining that with response, active response that's able to go ahead and mitigate, block, and prevent. It's like almost like having like a professional like security team inside your building 24/7 that's kind of ready to catch an intruder that as they step through a window or something like that, right? Maybe a good analogy. Um,
Absolutely.
so let's talk through uh, leadership considerations. So what are things that if I'm a leader of a business, what should I be thinking about? Where should I be focusing my energy?
Sure. And I guess I'd like to actually, Chloe, could we advance one slide, please? I'd like to, really emphasize that like we tend to get caught up in technology discussions, right? And for leadership, it's really, really important to back out of that and focus on the outcomes, focus on the cybersecurity outcomes that you want. And I'll tell you what I think they should be for most organizations. And it's simple. It's like number one, keep systems operational, right? Um, Encryption, that part of a ransomware attack is aimed at making sure your systems are not operational and applying pressure that way. So outcome one, keeping systems operational. And outcome two is keeping information confidential so that only the people that should have access to certain information have access to that. So your information isn't being leaked and going out on the dark web and being sold, right? So those are really two goals that I would encourage leaders to focus on. And then when it comes to cybersecurity for an organization, you need to think about it operating 24/7, 365, and there need to be people in the loop on that all of the time. And so some very large organizations can do this in-house. It gets really hard for mid-sized organizations and pretty much impossible for small-scale organizations to do this. And so this in-house versus third-party debate should be had, but there are really good third-party solutions available where you access not just all the technology, but also the people, and to know that you have people watching you 24/7, 365, right? And as finally, it's important to know where you are. Like, cybersecurity is a journey. It never stops, right? But if you want to try and figure out, okay, like what do we need to do? You need to first ascertain, where are you, right? Where are you on that map? And you probably need a bit of help with doing that. If you don't have the expertise in house, that is something ITS can help with to basically examine where are you strong and what are the areas for improvement to get on that path to cyber resilience.
So we can talk through just next steps, right? So like you mentioned, understanding where you're at, which we can basically help that process happening by effectively doing a straightforward risk assessment. And that's going to be basically like a brush stroke across your infrastructure and tell you exactly where your gaps and where vulnerability areas that you have that you may not be aware of, and then a prioritized pathway for getting those vulnerabilities addressed and those gaps closed off. So you can go ahead and reduce that risk for your business overall. So to go ahead and schedule one, we'd like to offer this complimentary to you guys. You can email us at secure@itsasap, or you can go ahead and scan that QR code. And we're happy to go through that and help you guys out with that. Um, so let's go through some questions. We got a bunch of questions that have started to come in here. So uh, maybe you can start off, Pat, with some of these. One of these is, how can I determine which risks are worth mitigating and investing in versus ones that I can accept? Like, what's that calculus, that your decision matrix if you're a leader there?
Well, I think there's never going to be just one, right? But you need to, like, you really do need to understand where are we, right? Like, are we going to? I'll throw out some questions to turn this around a bit. Like, can you detect an identity attack? That's the most prevalent attack today. Can you identify an identity attack? Right? Yes or no, and confirm how you do it. Right? If you don't, that would be a thing you want to address. Right? Um, can you detect a living off the land attack? It's pretty common. That's one of the stealthier attacks, right? If not, that points in another direction as another thing to try and tackle. Um, and then, how do I know if my vulnerability management program is working? I'm assuming you have one, but do you know right now what systems are patched and unpatched? And of the ones that haven't been patched, which ones have very high vulnerability scores? Like, what's the relative risk of each device? That helps steer, that proactive bit, right? So there's that practice of ongoing threat management, which should be part of what is happening in an organization. And is it properly being steered? Is it even happening? Right, that's a question. And then there's those other two things around specific threats. So that's like three things I would consider.
Yeah, good points. So if I start investing in managing cyber risk, what's the impact on my cyber insurance?
Good question. So cyber insurance used to be pretty easy to get. Quite frankly, the insurers didn't know what they were doing, and they got taken to the cleaners, and they're good at what they do. So they have changed their methodologies, right? So if you are today going to get a cyber insurance premium, you are going to get a questionnaire at a minimum, and you're going to have to, at a minimum, self-attest, like we're doing this, 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 and this, right? Um, and then they'll give you a quote based on what you're doing and what you're not doing. They might actually even require that you do certain things before they will even consider insuring you. I saw one example where a certain insurance company will not even offer cybersecurity insurance if you have exposed real remote desktop protocol on any of your servers that are internet facing, right? So it can be pretty specific, right? When renewal comes, they are if you've had a policy in place for a while, the renewal criteria are getting harder. So basically, the insurers are to cover themselves and to cover their own risk, requiring that you take additional steps. And guess what? If you get compromised and you said you were doing something and you didn't do it, the claim will not be honored. And that's just the way it is. It's because you will not have held up your part of the insurance deal effectively.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of denials right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it's, yeah.
All right, next question. What's going on with AI? We hear about it every day.
Yeah. Okay. We could do a whole, actually, we probably will do a
Yeah,
webinar on
we
this
probably
one
should
down
do
the
that.
road, Rob. But so
Yeah.
there is so much hype, right? I think we all realize there's a lot of hype. There are stories coming out that are blown out of proportion. Take a little factoid and it becomes this big thing. But what we do know is, first of all, the threat actors are leveraging AI. We know that we are leveraging AI. Um, and we know that AI itself can be targeted, right? Um, the important thing to recognize is that it's not quite there yet. Like, I use Copilot a lot. Copilot hallucinates sometimes, right? So it's really, really good at certain things, but I got to be careful with it. So I'll use one example. So Anthropic, which is one of the main AI providers, they put a report out in November that got a ton of airplay, and basically they said their infrastructure had been leveraged by a threat actor to create an end-to-end attack. Okay, the entire attack generated in AI. Um, and that it was used to compromise the 30 or 40 organizations, right? So basically, where the threat actor would have targeted one in the past, they use this to go after a bunch in parallel. And once they're going after 30 or 40, it's not a stretch to say they're going to go after 500 or 5,000, but the same level of effort, right? Now, the qualifier, which is in the executive summary of this report, does say that their investigation revealed that the AI was hallucinating a bit, and that makes it difficult to make the automation really work. So, so it's not quite there, right? But it's going in that direction, and it's going to get there before long. And our CEO actually blogged about a particular AI use case that could lead to a huge tsunami of attacks. Um, so, we on our side are doing what we can to make sure we're keeping pace, right? So that,
Yeah.
in a way, we don't care how an attacker is going to come at you, or if they get into one account. We're focusing on making sure that it doesn't spread, that it doesn't become a big thing, right? And I can say with confidence we are on top of that. We haven't had any protected organization suffer a full blown ransomware attack in our whole history.
Yeah. Good stuff. So beyond security awareness training, what else can be done to protect my business?
So security awareness training is on the people side, right? So I talked about arming people earlier. I'll just throw out one example, right? So if you want to arm your employees, it would be good to, like, let's say an employee comes across an email that looks really suspicious. It made it through the spam filter and the email filter, and it's like one of those well crafted ones that they think, okay, this doesn't look good. This doesn't look right. Um, Current model is you would want to send that to a person, and that other person who knows more is going to have a look at it, right?
Right.
You can actually have an Outlook plugin so that that's all automated. Where and ITS Secure offers that through a thing called a suspicious email analysis service. So there's a little plugin with a little logo. Employee gets a suspicious email, they can submit it to this, get an answer really fast saying, yeah, it's suspicious or it isn't. And it often comes down to the domain. Like that's often where you're going to spot it, where there's like one slight difference in a character that you're not going to spot when you look at it, but a machine will spot that. Analytics will spot that. Um, and that's a way to give them a way of fighting back and help make sure that employees feel like they're part of this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think to kind of add on to this a little bit, you can, we mentioned that, phishing emails is a very common entry point. So there's enhancements that you can make on the email scanning side that's in advance of it getting to your inbox. So almost think of it as like it's going through another filter. And a lot of AI is being used in that. And that's cutting out a lot of the malware, cutting out a lot of the threat attacks, so it doesn't get to your inbox. So, like, being able to have a cleaner inbox is always helpful, especially as some of that stuff can be, again, entry points to getting hacked. And the other thing I'd mention is around, what else can we be doing beyond security training and so forth? How many companies and businesses out here right now that for folks that are attending have a fully fleshed out incident response plan? And if you do have one, when's the last time you actually tested it? And do you do regular, simulations internally to kind of, you know, test it, make sure it's working, and make modifications along the way? This is something we call tabletop exercises. So those are other areas that I think businesses can, I think, honestly mature into. But those are kind of very common areas that I think are gonna, if you're spending time planning for how you would respond to an incident, that's really gonna make a big difference. And you're not kind of making it up as you go, which is like, that's probably a very difficult position for companies. I've seen that happen. Don't have a plan and you're just flying by the seat of your pants. That happened with a lot of these auto dealerships. They are just like, didn't know what to do. And just like, throwing their hands up. Let's see. Another one that has come in. What impacts will my business face if a supplier or a third party vendor that I use goes through a cyber attack?
Right. That's a tough one, and we're seeing a lot of that, right? So basically, what is happening today is these companies have had a wake up call. So it's happened to quite a few third party providers. They've lost business as a result of this, so they're upping their game. But so what can you do? You can ask questions of them, right? If Because at the end of the day, when you're taking advantage of their services, you're trusting them with your data. So you need to ask questions, the same questions you would ask of yourself, of your own organization, right? What are you doing to protect the data, right? Um, or do you have 24/7 coverage? Or what are you doing for vulnerability management? And you know what? If like they need to be prepared to answer those questions, right? And if they don't, or if they're evasive about it, that's a big red flag, right? You might want to look at going with someone else. So it's very difficult for businesses to impose that on people, other than to illustrate that it's a concern and that you have expectations, and to ask the questions. And again, if they're not forthcoming, that's a big red flag.
Sounds good. All right, we'll give it another maybe 10 seconds here if anybody else wants to submit any other questions. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping things up. And then, Chloe, if you go back to the previous slide, let's put that up for a sec. Just want to put up that contact screen. So again, if you're interested in getting a risk assessment, please drop us an email at secure@itsasap.com, or go ahead and scan that QR code. Happy to help and have a conversation with you guys. Pat, I want to thank you for sharing your wealth of information with us. It's been super helpful, and hopefully, folks out there have gotten some value out of that stuff. We're going to be having a couple upcoming webinars just to kind of let you know about. February 12th, invitations will be going out soon. We're going to be talking about how to best practices around file sharing and how best to share files across businesses, across we're like using a lot of kind of cloud applications and file servers and file shares and so forth. How do we securely share that information across to outside parties as well as internally, and how do you scale that? And then we're also going to be talking in March. We're going to have a webinar on some very common things that we're seeing right now is around deep fakes and how that's affecting the recruiting and hiring process. We're seeing people that we've had our own incident where we've seen someone effectively from North Korea try to get hired at our company through and using fake mechanisms. I know this is something that's been happening with a lot of other software companies. We're seeing a lot of this now. So things that you should be doing to tighten up your recruiting and HR process, and really interesting information there. So looking forward to that. So with that, thank you, Pat. Appreciate the time, and we'll see you all next time on the next go round, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.